Hi there. Welcome back again to the Ivory Tower Collections. Specifically, welcome back to the Ivory Tower lab area. Today's video is going to focus on this beast here, and again, this is the Atari 5200. What's today's video going to focus on? Well, it's actually going to focus on a very common issue that we encounter with these, the controllers. But not the controller itself, but with the 5200. I'm going to show you a real common issue that has come up in the past, and it's pretty much something that's going to plague, I would say, every 5200 at some point in time, just because of the age of how things are. But basically, the issue would be everything seems to be working great, you're playing games, no problem, the games you're playing operate fine, and then you go to play one other particular game, whatever it might be, and suddenly you find out that the directions seem to not work properly, and you would at first blame the controller. But you would be wrong. So, I'm going to show you today the process I go through to properly calibrate and adjust the Atari 5200 with a known good controller in today's video. Let's check it out. So here we are. We're looking at the current setup that I have in testing this 5200 out. We have the 5200 itself here. It's up and running. I've got a flash cartridge here to show a couple of different games. We have RF through this flat panel here, and then I have S-Video connected on this little monitor over here so that, you know, we can see the action from two different perspectives, I suppose. So I'm going to give you an example of a game that works correctly, and you would think that everything's good to go. So I have my controller here, okay? Yes, I'm missing the top row of buttons. This is a test controller, but just want to show you what the problem is. So here we go. We're going to fire up the game Dig Dug, and I'm going to need a way to start the game. Give me a second. Okay, so I'm able to move to the left, I'm able to move to the right, I'm able to move up, I'm able to move down. Both of my buttons are working. Basically, this controller seems to be 100%, no problem at all. I'm able to sit here and play the game. Crush the puka like I'm supposed to. I got Figar coming after me right now, and he got me. But you get the point. The controls seem to be working properly, no issues at all. But if we put in a different game, let's say we switch to a game like Gyros, for instance. So here we are. This is starting up. Let's check it out. Alright, so I'm able to move, I'm able to go to the top, but now suddenly I'm not able to go to the right at all. I'm trying to move to the right, and it's just not going anywhere. I can move up to the top, I can move down to the left a little bit. It's kind of skippy, kind of hesitating a bit. But yeah, obviously something seems amiss here. Is it the game? Is it the controller? Well, no, it's not actually. The problem, as it turns out, is the 5200. But it's not a huge issue, it's not a component that's gone bad, it's just simply an adjustment that's needed. So, let's switch over. I'm going to remove the cover off of this 5200, and we're going to go into a few more details about what's necessary to check this out. We're now focused on the 5200 itself. I've already removed the top cover, and the specific area that we need to focus on is in this part here. So the cool thing about this is that this adjustment that we're going to go through doesn't require you to have to remove the RF shielding at all on the console, which can be kind of a bear. So what are we going to need to do what we're going to do? Well, there are a couple of specific tools if you want to do this the proper way, which is what I'm going to show you here first, that you're going to need. One of the items that you're going to need is you're going to need some sort of a test cartridge. I have an example of Pete's test cartridge here in my hand, but I'm also going to show you another method that I use, and that is that I also have my Atari Max Ultimate SD flash cartridge here, and that's because I can load up different test programs on here, and this is what I'm going to use primarily for this video. The other thing you're going to need is going to be something that you're not going to be able to get easily, but don't let it dissuade you from what we're going to try to do today. Because what I'm going to use is basically going to give me the exact measurements for the adjustment, but there's other ways to more or less eyeball this. And that is what's in this bag right here. This is a Loopback test board. Now you can see that it's got 4 controller ports on it, the female connection style, and that's because this test board is literally designed to plug in to all 4 ports on a 5200. Now, you might be thinking, well, okay, great. So this is only going to work for a 4-port? Aha, not true. You see, if you've ever taken apart a 2-port 5200, it actually is laid out exactly the same way. It's just missing the center 2 ports. It just has the player 1 port here and the player 2 port extended over here to this side, which is actually player 4 on a 4-port unit. The reason why I mention this is because regardless of what model 5200 you have, Atari used the same basic bottom shell on both model types, meaning although you may only have a 2-port model, you're still going to have 2 empty holes here where the 4 ports, additional ports, would have been located, which means that if you do have access to get a hold of a 4-port test board like this, you can still use it on a 2-port unit with the cover removed. It will still fit into place, just that you'll only be able to see readings from the 1st port and the 4th port, technically, which will show up as 1 and 2 on a 2-player, or on a 2-port unit. But yeah, don't think that just because you only have access to a 4-port board that you can't still use it for testing a 2-port, because it is possible. So those are the 2 primary tools that we're going to need. Another tool that you're going to want to have is you're going to need yourself a little flat blade screwdriver like this. I've just got this little, I don't know, this is like a number 1 sized flat blade designed to, like, you know, put in your shirt pocket or something to carry around. And that's because we're going to need this to adjust the Pokey potentiometer on the main board itself. And I'll focus more on this in a little bit here so that you can get a better shot of it. Another thing I would advise is to get some contact cleaner spray. It doesn't have to be this exact brand, it can be pretty much anything, but you want like some tuner cleaner contact spray. And if you don't have access to that, well then try to get a hold of some good quality alcohol. Electronics grade is best, but just get a hold of some isopropyl alcohol. And that's because after so many years of these things sitting around being used or being in storage and not being used, chances are good that one of the reasons why the system is kind of out of whack on its controls is likely due to corrosion buildup inside this potentiometer trimmer itself. So before you really start all these adjustments, one of the things you're going to want to do is to spritz it up with some alcohol and get it up in there, or use the contact cleaner so that we can try to clean some of that out before we do our adjustments. Let's do that first. I'm going to change the camera zoom here a little bit so we can focus more in on this potentiometer real quick. Here is the potentiometer that I was talking about earlier. It's this one here. It's colored yellow on this one, but I've also seen it just colored white, and I've also seen it in slightly different models of the trimmer adjustment itself. But in all cases, it will always be located in the same place, both on the 4-port and the 2-port units, and that's going to be in the lower right-hand section of the main board, right where the RF cable disappears below the PCB here through this notch. It'll be right here. This bigger wheel you see over here, it's green in color. I've also seen this black. I've also seen it white. This is actually the color adjustment trimmer, and unless your colors are grossly out of whack, you probably won't ever need to mess with that. So yes, our attention is going to be focused on this little guy right here. So the first thing I'm going to do is what I mentioned before. I'm going to get my contact spray. Hopefully that'll focus in a little bit. And I'm going to take it, and I've got a little tube on mine, so I'm just going to spritz on the inside real quick. I'm going to point it right into the center and just give it a quick shot like that. It's okay if it kind of gets out a little bit. It's tuner cleaner. It's not going to really hurt much. And then once I've got that done, I'm going to want to take my screwdriver and I'm going to want to purposely actuate this potentiometer trimmer back and forth multiple times. And the reason for this is because we want to make sure that that contact cleaner gets up inside of there and works its way around the wiper inside and gets it cleaned up good. Try to get some of that corrosion off of there as much as possible. Again, it's not going to do us much good to try to adjust this if it's dirty or corroded, because the adjustments we make could very well drift again 5 minutes from now or 3 years from now. So it's good to just go ahead, spritz it up like this, we'll get it clean. Again, if all you have is some alcohol, that's not a problem. All you would need to do is just to put the alcohol on like a Q-tip or something. And then just, you know, with the Q-tip saturated, just kind of make sure you get the alcohol in there, and you do the same thing. And then I would just go ahead, and you'll notice when you're turning this that it will basically turn about 3/4 in either direction. Basically, it'll go from this corner of the trimmer to this corner of the trimmer. So to get a baseline, I would just kind of start with the trimmer right at the halfway position. I can almost guarantee you this isn't going to be set right from the get-go, but it's a good starting point to work from. What do we do from here? Well, now what we're going to do is I'm going to change the angle of my camera so that we can take a look at the monitors a little bit better, and we're going to see how I do the adjustment the factory way. So we're now ready to go through and talk about how to do the adjustment itself. So I'm going to give you a couple of tips on something. First of all, I had already mentioned one of the requirements that I'm going to use in this particular adjustment is to have my test board here, the controller calibration test board. And also, you want to make sure that you have a good functioning 5200 controller that, you know, basically as far as you can tell was working properly before. You shouldn't need to do too much adjustments on this, but it is sometimes possible, but I may cover that in a separate video. So yeah, you'll want to have that plugged in. And because you've probably got the top cover off, in fact you would have to in order to make the adjustment on that potentiometer, you're going to need a way to be able to get your cartridges to fit into the cartridge slot. Because you don't have the little pegs, it's not going to fit over it. So what I do is I actually take part of a Q-tip and I basically cut it in half like this. And this part here, without the cotton on it, you can actually insert it into one side of the dust cover holes on the cartridge port, and that will allow it to open up without the top cover. So at that point, I'm just going to carefully take the whole assembly, as you see here. I'm going to insert it into the 5200, just like that. Now let's go ahead and turn on the system. There we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the diagnostics routine, and specifically I'm going to use the diagnostics 1.1. So I'm going to load that up right now. Okay, here we are looking at the standard diagnostics test. And the specific test that we want to use is the Pokey adjustment test on this, which happens to be keypad press number 5. And what that's going to do is that's going to pull up a screen that shows you your current values that are being read from the controller port. Again, I have this joystick plugged in right now, and I basically have it eyeball centered. And you'll see that it's currently reading about 94, 98 on the horizontal, and the vertical, again, is switching between 97, 98. That's very common to see the numbers fluctuate a couple of digits plus or minus. To do the proper adjustment, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to unplug this 5200 controller. And when I do this, it's going to go to an infinite reading on the display because I now have the controller unplugged. From here, I will now take my test board and I'm going to plug it into the ports and watch what happens to the display. There we go. We now show number readings on all 4 controller ports, and also you'll see where it says keypad, the numbers are scrolling through. It shows a bunch of characters scrolling through. That's because what this test board is doing is it's actuating all of the different character control codes that would be done off of the keypad itself. But the part that we're most concerned with here is actually the numbers for the horizontal reading for controller port 1. And that's because the factory specific settings using this diagnostics requires you to set that horizontal reading to about 112 plus or minus 1 or 2. So that means anywhere from basically around 110 to around 115 should do the job. But the closer you can dial it in to exactly 112, the better. And the way that I'm going to make this adjustment is I'm going to use that flat-headed screwdriver again, and I'm now going to put it into that potentiometer, and I'm going to turn it and adjust it. Now you'll see that as I turn it to the left, the numbers actually drop. And if I go all the way to the left, they drop very far. And as I start to turn it back to the right, the numbers start to go back up. And I go, that's all the way to the right now, where I'm reading almost 150. But again, the adjustment I want is to have that set at about 112. So I'm going to slowly turn this back to the left until that first port horizontal reading is about 112. It's right there at about 112, 113, give or take. Just got to kind of tweak it. Some of these will adjust a little easier than the others, but that's probably pretty close. I mean, again, it's within plus or minus, so we're in good shape. Another thing to keep in mind is you'll notice that the other ports are static and not moving. Again, that's fairly normal as well. You'll also notice that the vertical reading is also kind of fluctuating, and notice that the vertical reading on this is also very close to the horizontal. That's not going to always be the case. In fact, that's kind of a rare instance. I don't normally see that on the 5200. In most cases, I've seen that horizontal reading when I set it to about 112. I've seen the vertical reading register anywhere from about 113 or 116 on average up in the lower 120s. But the up and down doesn't seem to be nearly as critical in most games as the left and right is. So there we go. We've got this potentiometer adjusted where it needs to go. But how's that actually going to work? Are the games themselves going to work any better? Well, let's take a look at them. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect my controller test board. Plug my normal controller in now for testing. And again, I just kind of had this eyeballed and roughly where the center was. That's why it's important to have something like the controller test board. But I'll discuss what you can do if you don't have one later. So now, let's go back and try Dig Dug again, just to make sure it still works normally. Okay, the right works, left is working fine, up still works good, down still works without any issues. See if we can take FIGAR out. Nope, didn't dig it down far enough. Okay, so yeah, Dig Dug seems to be working just fine. Of course it was before, but the real test is to check out Gyrus again. So here we go, let's fire up Gyrus and see if it controls any better now. Oh yeah, look at that. I'm able to move to the right and to the left and all the way around properly, as I would expect. Awesome. Doesn't mean it's going to improve my gameplay any, but at least now I know that the controls are working the way I expect them to. So let's take another look at a game that's very, very picky about this. Probably the most picky game I have found in regards to controller calibration. If you can get the game Gyrus and this game working properly, you're pretty much golden on your potentiometer adjustment. And that game is Bounty Bob Strikes Back. So specifically, the issues with Bounty Bob that tend to occur is that Bounty Bob won't move to the left or to the right if you don't have your adjustment set properly. Well, you can see that I'm able to move to the right, I'm able to move to the left, no problem. I can push up or down to go between the teleporters. So yeah, Bounty Bob seems to be controlling great. No problems. So now we're looking at the diagnostic screen again, and we're back on the Pokey adjustment numbers, and you'll see that it's pretty much, like I said before, we're basically dead on at 112 and 116 in this case. But what do I actually have plugged in? Well, I actually have that same controller, only this time I've taken the top off of the controller so that I actually have access to the potentiometer arms that control the directions themselves. And the reason for this is because if you don't have one of these boards here, I wanted to show you another adjustment that I use using the controller itself. Basically what you do is with the controller taken apart like this, you want to set the potentiometer arms at exactly the 6 and 9 positions as close as possible when you have it set up. If you've done that, take another look at the readings and you'll see that at least in the case of the horizontal, the left and right, I'm bang on to a 112 reading, just like I would expect it to be. And remember what I said earlier in the video about how the vertical will sometimes also fluctuate and it might be a little bit higher. In this case, I said I usually see it at around 114 or 115, 116. Well, you'll see that we are slightly just flickering just tiny bit between 115 and 116. So basically exactly where I would expect it to be for proper calibration. So this tells me that this controller as well as this 5200 are properly calibrated and all the games should work just fine. So let's take a look at Pete's test cartridge because it's a little bit different and you can't use this board in Pete's test cartridge because Pete's test cartridge wasn't designed for it. So let's take a look at that next. I've got Pete's test cartridge ready to go here. And by the way, the reason why I'm bringing up Pete's test cartridge is because this is a pretty easy to get cartridge that you can have made up. I actually bought this one from the Atari Age booth at a Portland Retro Gaming Expo a couple of years ago. And it's just another test cartridge for 5200 systems, but it also has a controller reading test on it that we can also use to help calibrate. And in this case, I'm going to show you what the numbers should be, at least with this Pete's test cartridge and this 5200, since we already know that this 5200 is calibrated and ready to go. So the same thing as before, I've got my little Q-tip bud, just the 1/2, jammed up in here on one side so that the dust cover door can open up properly. And I'm going to insert Pete's test cartridge. I once again have my controller set up here. I already have the cover still off of it, but that's not really critical in this case. So let's turn it on. Okay, it goes through its usual diagnostic routine with those colorful screens, and then here we are looking at Pete's test cartridge itself. Now, I haven't moved this controller. It's centered up exactly where it was on the previous test, but you will notice that our little cursor dot here is not directly in the center of the screen, but that's okay. We already know that this controller and this 5200 are calibrated properly. So let's go to the adjustment test here. So here we are, we're looking at the adjustment test again for the Pokey on Pete's test cartridge. And you will see that once again, we have basically the same values. We basically have a 112 and a 115. And it could be that maybe I jostled the controller just ever so slightly. There we go. See, I just barely touched this bottom pot here. And now we're reading around the 112 mark again. And I could probably do the same thing here with the top just ever so slightly. So yeah, roughly the exact same readings of 112 and 115. I'm now going to show you another unofficial way to, note I said unofficial method for adjusting that potentiometer trimmer on the 5200. Let's say you don't have access to a test cartridge and you do have a good working controller and you know that you can take the cover off of this and you can center up the potentiometer trimmers where they need to be, again at the 6 and 9 positions. But you don't have the test cart, you don't have the other things you need, but you can access the 5200 and you just want to get to playing your games now. Well, let me show you a way to do that. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to use the game Missile Command. So again, if you've got everything centered up, let's fire up Missile Command and take a look at what we have here. And let's get the game started. I've now paused the game real quick. So I still have the trimmers in the 6 and 9 position, and basically when you start up a game of Missile Command and you have your trimmer pots on the controller adjusted in the center like I said here, and you know that this is working properly, the cursor, the crosshair itself, should be basically centered on the game screen when the game starts up. So if it's not for whatever reason, again, you can use the flat-bladed screwdriver and you can adjust that potentiometer while you have the game paused like this until you basically have that cursor in the center of the screen where needed. So thanks again for hanging out with me today in the lab area of the Ivory Tower collections. I hope you found this video useful. It's one that I've been meaning to do for a while, and I don't know, I guess I just keep slipping it. I just keep forgetting to do it. But I had a client send their 5200 in for some additional service work, and because I usually calibrate the systems as part of the normal diagnostics routine, I thought this was the perfect opportunity to show you the process. So, thanks again, and have a good one.